So we will be, inshallah, continuing from Surah Al-A'raf from Ayah 146. So, of course, it was talking about, before that, it was talking about Prophet Musa alayhi salam meeting the Lord Almighty, talking to the Lord Almighty directly, and how the other men that accompanied Prophet Musa alayhi salam, they eventually went into a coma, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him the tablets. The tablets contained maw'idha. We talked about the maw'idha, which is a reminder, and a maw'idha would mean a kind reminder. And we also talked about وَتَفْصِيلًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ, where it also contained التفصيل لكل شيء, which basically would mean the details of Sharia, the details that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him in Sharia. And of course, when we talk about the details that it contained, when we're talking about details, which is the word tafsila likulli shay, we're talking about the details in every different corner of life. Now, in Islam, very similar to the details that were sent onto previous prophets as well, in where the details may be details that relate to religion, that relate to spirituality, that relate to life and legislature, in making sure that other people's lives are also preserved. And of course, the other part, which is making sure that your understanding of the world is actually not getting polluted by different things that may be surrounding you, and in fact are a result of different pressures that may be because of people wanting pleasure over over hidayah, or over guidance, or over reality of what life is. And of course, the other part about education is the issue of making sure that people are not following what might be presented as a study, and the reality of it is really delusion, or at least containing more of speculation than actually factual evidence about life. So that's why it's really important to understand that when we're talking about Sharia, the Sharia that previous prophets and the Prophet ﷺ were relating to the pretty much the same grounds in which to preserve the deen, preserve the life of the individual and the masses, to preserve the education and the mind, or the vision or perspective of how people see reality, to make sure that they are able to be uh, distinctive in measuring and understanding the world that surrounds them, um, far away, and of course away from one pleasure or inclinations, and people's inclinations influencing the right understanding, the right interpretation of life. And of course, the other side is the speculation. And number four is the issue of family, preserving the family. Preserving family would also mean preserving chastity. So just like in the Sharia that we know of, El Yahud, that also had forbid adultery, forbid fornication. Same thing with Islam, and the main reason was to preserve family. And of course, when we talk about preserving the family, or when we're talking about preserving all the different guidelines of Sharia, was really in order to maintain the same laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in the universe slash created in nature, whether that was on the individual that was or the community, that it would actually be with going to the same direction that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in. So the other the last one, which is the economical slash financial, and of course the transactions, in order to make sure that justice is in place, and in order to make sure that injustices don't happen as a result of wealth or greed getting in place. That's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually puts tafsila likulli shay, tafsila likulli shay, meaning detail for every single matter. Now let's continue. فَخُذْهَا بِقُوَّةٍ. فَخُذْهَا means to take something, but this is not an actual take, meaning, taking as a possession. But فَخُذْهَا بِقُوَّةٍ means to implement it, but with strength, with power. So, what does it mean to implement something, to implement the laws of the Lord Almighty with strength? This is not necessarily talking about authority per se, but this is actually talking about implementing it with determination that this is the truth and with complete confidence and, of course, with no hesitation. This is really important. فَخُذْهَا بِقُوَّةٍ, in where the person is taking it with no hesitation and implementing it with complete steadfastness, if we could say that. وَأْمُرْ قَوْمَكَ يَأْخُذُوا بِأَحْسَنِهَا. وَأْمُرْ قَوْمَكَ, and of course this is وَأْمُرْ, and it's really important to see the word وَأْمُرْ because this is actually saying that there is an order. During our times, there's always the word of haram police. And of course, the reason why that term is used right now very often is because during or in our postmodern era, which people may not realize where this term is coming from, there's always that idea that there is. That everything is really relative, and therefore truth and falsehood is based on relativism, and that relativity, since no one contains truth and nothing contains truth, therefore you cannot consider yourself or consider any area to actually contain the truth, and therefore consider that as the paradigm where you would rule X or Y or Z action as wrong or as right, because then you are technically saying that such an action has a certain center that we can actually base things on. But in Islam, that is totally wrong. In Islam, this is nothing but another form of deviation, just as the other deviations in where the person is ordering for what is wrong, to consider that there is no paradigm to use in order to distinguish right and wrong is another form of deviation, another form of an illusion. And therefore, in Islam, al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar is actually obligatory, and what it means is that ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad. So what does that mean? It means ordering for what is good, the good that the Lord Almighty has regarded as righteous, and forbidding what is evil, in where the person is using the paradigm that the Lord Almighty had set, and considering that that is the center, and therefore I would order for what is good and forbid what is evil, to mean forbidding what is evil using the necessary measurements. Now, it's really important that ordering for what is good and forbidding what is evil on a condition that it does not lead to a larger or a greater harm. Of course, so if you, for example, want to order or forbid what is evil, you want to make sure that you measure the consequences of what you are saying. Is this going to lead that person into committing greater harm? And how do we look into that? By understanding the reality of the situation, and of course what the probability, so a little bit of math right here, what the probability is if that person were to abstain from such a habit, or maybe if I were to intervene and order that person to stop such a habit, what the consequences might be. Might the person probably attack me, or probably even commit a greater harm? So in this situation, the person has to have the wisdom to understand how we deal with those matters and how we actually do that. الامر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر وامر قومك ياخذوا باحسنها. So باحسنها, I'm going to literally translate these words here and then explain it. And order your people, قومك is more your tribe, يأخذوا, to take the best of it. But here's the thing. The best of it means what? Is it really saying that in the ayat? So وَأْمُرْ قَوْمَكَ يَأْخُذُوا بِأَحْسَنِهَا doesn't really mean order your people to take the best of it. Because the second that you say the best of it, that would mean that there is one side of the orders, that there's one side of the orders that were not even good. Because if you want to say this is best, that would by default actually mean that some of it is actually bad. Well, that's not what it actually means, but there's a preference. So يأخذوا بأحسنها. There are different opinions between scholars on the word يأخذوا بأحسنها. Doesn't necessarily mean to take the best, meaning that there are things in Sharia where something is good but something else is better. So for example, you you go through a situation, all right, you can choose to retaliate, and you are given the right to retaliate for somebody that might have oppressed you, or you can choose to be patient. Does Islam permit both? Islam permits both, but being patient is better. Retaliation is permissible, at least, within certain regulations, but being patient is better. Another thing, for example, in where probably when we're talking about pain and when we're seeing especially evil, that brings in a lot of questions. How do I deal with the evil that's around me? Am i supposed to be seeking medication, or can I actually seek to be patient and get rewarded for the pain? So we're looking at differences of opinions right there, but how do we actually look at what is the best? What is the best of all those areas and the different orders that actually surround us, in the different matters in our life. Now, يأخذوا بأحسنها, to take the best things in the Sharia itself, and of course, in that sense, to consider the highest rewarding, the things that actually give the highest reward, in order to get the reward from the Lord Almighty, and the Lord Almighty to be the one to save you or protect you, or even take over the different illnesses, or the different harm that you might be facing. Same thing, for example, forgiving, qasas, and forgiving. So if, for example, you had somebody, I don't know, kill your son, God forbid, or something like that, and then you do have the right to choose that the person would be executed, because al-qasas, which is al-qasas, because of what they had committed to your son or to your family member. But you also have another choice, which is al-afu, forbearance, forgiving, and letting that person go. So both are actually part of Sharia. So ya'khudhu bi ahsaniha, in where you're choosing to forgive, is better than choosing to retaliate and have that person get killed. سأريكم دار الفاسقين. I will show you off the house of al-fasiqin. Now, that we want to remember, al-fasiqin here is not necessarily to mean al-fasiqin, those that are insisting, and those that are determined to do sin, but this is actually talking about the nation, which is what some scholars said, that it was talking about the nation of Egypt at the time, because of remember that the prophet Musa alayhi salam, and the people that were with him were fleeing Egypt. So here, Sa'urikum Dar al Fasiqin is actually talking about that they will be seeing those different examples of how those that did not take the words of the Lord Almighty, or even practice and implement the details of the Sharia, of course, Sharia Bani Israel, and how, because they didn't implement it, how they later lived in the consequence of being part of the fasiqeen, and what the consequence was. What the consequence was, well, we're going to look at it down in more ayat, in where sa'urikum dar al fasiqin, this is more of a threat. This is more of a threat. So if they decide to turn their backs on the maw'idha, on the maw'idha, which is basically the aqidah, the aqidah, the good word, the guidance that the Lord Almighty had sent, and also turn their backs on the different details in the regulations that the Lord Almighty had said. And if they were not consistent with practicing the words of the Lord Almighty, and they did not order it amongst their people. In other words, when we talk about what murqawmaka, would also mean, yes, you're practicing this amongst the community, but you're also implementing it on a government level. You're implementing it on a government level and then implementing it and within the community. That is يأخذوا بأحسنها. So وأمر قومك يأخذوا بأحسنها. This is actually talking about, so one, the aqidah of it, and where it goes. Number two, in where we're talking about the practice of it, in other words, the judicial side of it. So this is what the government is based on, or this is what the community is based on in terms of guidance and how they see the world. Then tafsila likulli shay is basically how we implement it in law and how we make sure that this is to be implemented in its detail, and that it would people would not give up on the orders of the Lord Almighty. Now, the other part, سأصرف عن آياتي الذين يتكبرون في الأرض بغير الحق. Now, here's the thing, is that when you look at this ayah, although yes, there was a threat right here in where سأريكم دار الفاسقين. In other words, if you don't practice this, you will see the consequence, just as the consequence of those dar al-fasiqeen. Is it hellfire? Is it the different countries, or is it the different nations that had abstained from implementing the Lord Almighty's laws? um Thamud, Ad, whatever it is, the Pharaoh, the pyramids, etc., all these different areas, to be able to see that those that abstained from implementing the laws of the Lord Almighty, how they simply perished, and that to see the consequence and to see the pattern, that those that would abstain from the Lord Almighty, that this is going to be the same consequence, the same result, in where they will perish too, because of taking the same exact path as those that have turned their backs on the words of the Lord Almighty. So now we continue. سأصرف عن آياتي الذين يتكبرون في الأرض بغير الحق وإن يروا كل آية لا يؤمنوا بها وإن يروا سبيل الرشد لا يتخذوه سبيلا. I want you to look at this ayah, سأصرف, in where the Lord Almighty, سأصرف, when you look at that scene right there, this is speaking about a future. سأصرف, in other words, that, and of course, the Lord Almighty, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not delude people, all right? But عن آيات الذين يتكبرون في الأرض بغير الحق. So because these people were having that pride, because of the pride that they were living in, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that, just as the ayat were saying, فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُم. فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُم. When their hearts turned in delusion, turned away from their Lord Almighty, the Lord Almighty let their hearts continue in that section, in that trajectory, let's say it that way, because they were the ones that initiated the delusion. They were the ones that chose to go into that path. And this is really important to mention, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not delude people. So many times people will say, I'll go into hidayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills the hidayah for me. It's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills anyone. There are two types of wills. There's the will in where it is a will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like the ayah, لا يرضى لعباده الكفر. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not will, therefore does not accept that people would practice or would go into and embrace el kufr, which is disbelief. The Lord Almighty does not accept that for them. But at the same time, when you look at the other ayat that speak of will, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the pattern, and that pattern does not go against the patterns that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set. In other words, so when you, for example, if you have a pencil, you throw the pencil, while it's being thrown, is not going outside of the laws of physics that the Lord Almighty created. Same thing when we're talking about human action. The human action is that فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُم. When that person initiated izigh, or when that person initiated delusion, initiated their path, and they began with the path of going into the wrong direction, that's when the pattern is that when people go away from the right path, it will continue going to the wrong direction. So here we go, same thing. سأصرف عن آياتي الذين يتكبرون في الأرض بغير الحق. Those that had the arrogance on earth and بغير الحق, with no evidence, with no truth as a basis to stand on, the result is سأصرف عن آياتي. The result is that there's a general rule that those that decide to be arrogant, to listen, and of course to listen, to hear, and to see. When we're talking about to listen and to hear, we're talking about two different items here. To listen is that when you're giving it a listening ear, but a listening ear in where there's a difference between السماع and الاستماع, where the person is actually taking a moment to listen and comprehend what they're hearing. And there's that difference. To listen and comprehend what they're hearing, in where the person is not just taking the words as if it's just something to hear and then walk away, but they're comprehending. So when we're looking at سأصرف عن آياتي, meaning that فإنها لا تعمى الأبصار ولكن تعمى القلوب التي في الصدور. It's not the eyes that don't see, but it's the hearts that blind from seeing the truth. So having that being said, سأصرف عن آياتي is actually speaking about that the Lord Almighty, because of the arrogance that these people had in their hearts, they will not be able to recognize. So when we talk about سأصرف, this is talking about a recognition. They won't be able to recognize آياتي. Now the word آية can mean a number of things. That word ayah can mean the words of the Lord Almighty, and can also mean the signs of the Lord Almighty, the signs that you see in the open book, which is nature around you, in where it's reflecting the magnificence of the Lord Almighty. So, سأصرف عن آياتي, in where those that were living in that arrogance, they will not be able to recognize and realize the different signs of the Lord Almighty, because their hearts are so pacified. And that's why you're going to see that the last word in that ayah was actually talking about al-ghafilin, that they will be pacified away from seeing the signs of the Lord Almighty. وَإِن يَرَوْا كُلَّ آيَةٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا. وَإِن يَرَوْا, and of course here we're talking about seeing. Whenever they would see every single ayah, every single sign, they would not believe in it. وَإِن يَرَوْا سَبِيلَ الرُّشْدِ لَا يَتَّخِذُوهُ سَبِيلًا. And whenever they would see the path of guidance. Now I want you to look at the word rushdi here, because there is another qira'ah that actually reads it as rushd. Rushd is different than rushd, although technically it would actually go back to the same source, because sabila rushd is the path of guidance, but sabila rushd means the path of religion. So what is the difference? If we're saying sabila rushd, we're actually talking about the path of guidance, the guidance that the Lord Almighty had actually sent down in order for people to see. So this is the guidance. We're talking about the practice here. We're talking about implementation of the word of the Lord Almighty, which is the guidance and how they live it. Sabila Rashd is actually speaking about religion in terms of the idea itself, the whole view of how you see the purpose of life, and where you're heading, and where you're going, and what life actually means. Now I want you to look at this ayah, in where it says that whenever they would see every ayah, so they would see every ayah, they won't even believe. So did they say it? They did say it. Did they recognize it? No, they didn't. Why didn't they recognize it? Well, because they had arrogance in their heart, and that's why they couldn't recognize it. And that's why they said the word sa'asrifu is more talking about recognition and realization than actually not being able to see it. They're seeing it. It's right in front of them. The sky's in front of them. The heavens, the whatever it is, your own creation, the way your body functions, and the world around you, and how you see the pattern. You're able to see it. You probably have a PhD in physics and biology and PhD in who knows what. You're probably the best, but couldn't even see that this is a sign and a reflection of the magnificence of the Lord Almighty. So were they able to understand it? Oh, they could definitely calculate all the different things in physics and probably biochemistry and you name it. You name that science. They're able to calculate how fast it goes, how what next, and how these things combine and how things function, etc. But they couldn't even recognize that this is a reflection on the magnificence of the Lord Almighty. وَإِن يَرَوْا سَبِيلَ الرُّشْدِ لَا يَتَّخِذُهُ سَبِيلًا. And even when they would see سبيل الرشد or الرشد, سبيل الرشد meaning the path of guidance, they would not take it as sabila. The word sabil is a path, or of course sabila meaning a practice in life. They wouldn't take it as something to implement in their practice of life. وَإِن يَرَوْا سَبِيلَ الْغَيِّ يَتَّخِذُهُ سَبِيلًا. Yet when they see the path al-ghay. I try to look at the word al-ghay because this is, this is subhanAllah, this is a very intricate word to use in where sabil al-ghay, the path of al-ghay. Now, when you look at the word al-ghay is more of a person's pleasure and a person's own emotions, in a person's let's say their own motives, which can be motivated due to different things. Maybe their greed, maybe their hormones. It could be so many different things. Maybe it's just pleasure, whatever that they're seeking, and that would be sabil al. In other words, they're letting their own their own motives, their personal motives, their own pleasures, etc., guide or motivate or mentor their actions. That would be sabil al ghay. They would recognize that this is actually a result of their wants, but it's not supposed to be necessarily the right thing, but yet they will still take it as the path to implement in life. And when we're talking about implementing in life, we're talking about implementation on a personal level, or even to enforce implementation on a government level, and of course voting for it or whatever it is. And that's basically the same path. ذلك بأنهم كذبوا بآياتنا وكانوا عنها غافلين. So what led to all this? Well, it actually began with when they had denied the signs of the Lord Almighty. So when you look at path, it makes no sense. If you want to speak of da'wah, it makes no sense to speak about the actions and the legislatures and what's right and wrong in action when the person himself is not understanding aqidah. The first thing that you want to focus on is really the first part, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to prove the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to prove that the Lord Almighty exists, and the list goes on and on. And then the details in legislature actually follow. So once the person gets to the recognition of understanding, one, the open book signs, which is, how this world is a magnificent creation, it reflects a magnificent creator. So here's the first thing, in where, yes, maybe that person is at an agnostic level, but then la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So la ilah, in where they're recognizing, yes, there's a magnificent creation, illallah, and then they're recognizing the Lord Almighty, that this world has one pattern and therefore leading to one Lord Almighty, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Then they're recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the messages and guidance with the prophets and messengers, peace be upon them. And that's when they'll be able to take the guidance in terms of legislature. So it's really important to recognize these two sides. And it's really important to look at here that يَرَوْا كُلَّ آيَةٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا. And this is يَرَوْا كُلَّ آيَةٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا. This is actually talking about the Aqidah side. This is talking about the Aqidah side, in where they're recognizing the evidences to help them build the foundation, to see truth, to recognize truth. And this is really important. I want you to look at the word yaraw in where they're seeing it. And of course, seeing in Islam has different levels in where the person can see. And that's why when you look at the hadith, that the hadith Jibril alayhi salam, in where it began with shahadatu an la ilaha illallah. And the word shahada actually means witnessing. And then la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah wa iqam as-salah wa ita zakah. There's that the beginning of the change in terms of their relationship with how they recognize the existence of the Lord Almighty and the messages that He had sent. So they built in that foundation. But then in the other segment of the hadith, in where he would say, أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله. But here's a question. So أن تؤمن, the second type of seeing, the first one was to see in terms of shahada, as if you're witnessing with your eyes. But then أن تؤمن is another level in where it's not recognizing with your eyes, but it's recognizing with your heart. But recognizing with your heart, recognizing with your heart what? And if you look at the hadith, أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله, all the different tenets that were mentioned, believing in Allah, the angels, the holy books, and etc. If you're actually looking at those different tenets that were mentioned, those are actually part of the unseen. So how is it that this is talking about an tu'mina? It's a type of seeing in where the heart is recognizing and seeing. So how is that even in place? So that's why when we look at that, when the eyes and the mind, so shahadatu alla ilaha illallah, it's a mind, it's a mental recognition, and then that is implemented into action through salah, zakah, etc. And then once the mind absorbs the reality of it, that's when the heart embraces it and is capable of seeing what normally is part of the unseen. But it's not that they're seeing malaika roaming around, but it's that they recognize deeply in their hearts the existence of the other tenets of faith. Now, the last thing in where that hadith, in where the Prophet when he was asked about al-ihsan, he actually says, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. Again, it was using the word تراه. It was using the word to see. And seeing, and تعبد الله كأنك تراه, is it's worshiping of the Lord Almighty as if you could see the Lord Almighty. Again, the center is around seeing. So when we look at the word here, وَإِن يَرَوْا كُلَّ آيَةٍ, this is actually speaking about the recognition of mind recognition. And of course, the second part is iman, in where the person is implementing. So this is the mind recognition, which is aqidah. The second part is the action recognition, which is amilu salihat, which is to implement guidance, to implement it in action. It's not enough that you recognize something in your mind, but it's really important to actually take that recognition into the step of implementation in the different parts of your life. And that's why you could see right here, whenever they would see every single sign of the Lord Almighty, because of their arrogance, they would not believe in it. And when they would see the guide, the path of guidance, they would see. Again, the word is see, because remember, it's the same type of seeing that we were talking about earlier, in where it's different levels of seeing. Because even when shahadat an tu'mina billahi wa malaikatihi wa rusulihi, or sorry, that's an tu'mina, but shahadat an la ilaha illallah wa Muhammad Rasulullah, and then it says tuqim as-salah wa tu'ti az-zakah. So how is it that is a type of seeing? It's that type of implementation, in where when we're talking about seeing, it takes more than just an actual recognition of the existence of something, but that existence that you are recognizing, you're relating to it in spirit, you're relating to it in action, you're relating to it with your heart, you're relating to it with a very important thing, which is the dimension of what the purpose of it is. So the purpose of, for example, the purpose of reproduction is not for the sake of pleasure. Pleasure is one side within halal, but reproduction is in order to continue the race of mankind, to continue existing. And therefore, when we look at, for example, reproduction as one point, we're actually putting it in and the dimension that it falls in, which is the purpose of life. Same thing, your life, that you're not created to just live and create a civilization, whatever it is, and get your degree and reproduce and build all these different things, but you put your life in the category, in the different dimensions that it falls in, is that the life that you are living is actually not for the sake of life, but is actually a pathway to lead to a purpose of life, which is al-akhirah. So right here, this would be talking about the sharia, like I said, وَإِن يَرَوْا سَبِيلَ الْغَيِّ يَتَّخِذُهُ سَبِيلًا. And of course, if they do not recognize the first part of it, which is al-aqidah, and they don't implement it in action, that will lead, and again, the same exact thing in where arrogance leads to the person not recognizing the ayat, same thing, the person not practicing the guidance of the Lord Almighty, that will eventually lead that the person, whenever they would see the path of misguidance, they would take it as the path that they decide to take in life. And that's the reason to why they're living in this كانوا عنها غافلين. They're living in a life of pacifying themselves without them realizing. ذلك بأنهم كذبوا بآياتنا. The reason to it is really because they denied the signs of the Lord Almighty, the verses of the Lord Almighty, the message of the Lord Almighty. وكانوا عنها غافلين. And then they ended up being غافلين, being pacified away from recognizing the Lord Almighty, recognizing the practice that they should practice their life based on the regulations of the Lord Almighty, and finally living a life in where they're not recognizing the purpose of life as well. والذين كذبوا بآياتنا ولقاء الآخرة حبطت أعمالهم. So those, of course, the report here after all this, والذين كذبوا بآياتنا, those that had كذبوا, you could see it's not كذبوا, it's كذبوا. In other words, they didn't just deny one, but it was a denial that they were determining to live based on. They were determining, they were insisting to live in denial of all the signs that the Lord Almighty had sent and had shown the people. وَلِقَاءِ الْآخِرَةِ. Now I want you to look at this one. وَلِقَاءِ الْآخِرَةِ, meaning liqa, the meeting on Judgment Day or on Day of Judgment. حبطت أعمالهم. I want you to look at the word habitat, because the word habitat would actually mean that habitat, it's like it falls. It just falls. It just becomes that reality that falls right before them. أعمالهم, but their actions would fall. Now, what does that mean? الذين كذبوا بآياتنا. الذين كذبوا بآياتنا, well, they denied the Lord Almighty's signs. ولقاء الآخرة. Now I want you to look at over here, because when we look at this is another, remember the paradigm of understanding the Quran, there are different laws in where this is amanu and this is amilu salihat. Same thing right here. This is relating to amanu and this is relating to amilu salihat. Why is liqa al-akhirah relating to amilu salihat? Because the only reason why anybody would implement any type of a regulation in their life or justice, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set, is really in order to gain something in the akhirah. What does that mean? Let's say, for example, when we look at atheism, they would consider that there is no subjective morality. What does that mean? In other words, when we look at morality, there's nothing, according to atheism or new atheism to be more specific, there's nothing that proves or no meaning to implement any type of right or wrong. In other words, if you get away with it, you basically had achieved something. When does it become a problem? When you don't get away with it. In other words, if you manage to steal and rob a bank, you manage to rob a bank, well, you got the money. Here's the advantage: you got the money. The disadvantage is if you ended up in jail and you got caught. So here, وَلِقَاءِ الْآخِرَةِ, for a believer, regardless of whether I get caught for robbing a bank or I don't get caught, in the end, I would know that the Lord Almighty I'm is and meeting the Lord Almighty is something that is for sure going to happen, and therefore I will be implementing morality and ethics in my life because I know that one day I will be held accountable for them. In other words, when we speak of justice in Islam, when we speak of justice in Islam, liqa al-akhirah, the akhirah, whether I get oppressed or whether I am the oppressor, those two those two areas, because of believing in al-akhirah, if I'm oppressed, I would know that one day the Lord Almighty would compensate me for the loss that I had lived through. And if I'm oppressor, the liqa al-akhirah, judgment day, is what is going to be, let's say, the guilt feeling on the inside is what's going to be pushing me to do the right thing, to implement justice from there. So والذين كذبوا بآياتنا ولقاء الآخرة, this is because of العامل الصالحات. حبطت أعمالهم. Why? Because somebody might say, well, this person is doing the right thing. They're giving millions and millions of dollars to the poor people in Africa. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in the end, is that in Allah لا يغفر أن يشرك به ويغفر ما دون ذلك لمن يشاء, that the Lord Almighty does not forgive or dismiss that anyone would associate partners with the Lord Almighty, yet he will forgive whatever he wills in terms of different actions other than associating partners with the Lord Almighty slash shirk, and then he would forgive the rest of what he chooses to forgive from. So habitat a'maluhum is telling us that the Lord Almighty, all the different actions that they had expected to be that savior for them, or the actions that they thought were going to be bringing them the success, in the end is going to fall right before their eyes. هل يجزون إلا ما كانوا يعملون. And speaking of which, by the way, scholars actually had differences of opinions when we're looking at uh, like for example, when talking about Michael Jackson donated lots of money, and you're looking at what's her name, uh, what is that, I forgot her name, Mother Teresa, and what the orphanages that she had opened, and you're talking a lot about many different people that were probably stars or probably celebrities or whatever it is, that donated and opened orphanages, and Angelina Jolie, and who knows what their names are, all these different people. Did they do good? Well, definitely they're doing a lot of good things. They're donating, they're opening orphanages, they're doing all these different things. So won't these people also get rewarded? For trust me, I never donated $1 million whatsoever, let alone 25 and 30 and $60 million. I don't think, even if you would count all the money that I got from my early childhood, and right now I'm going into 42, I don't think all the money that I spent, not on donation, but in my life, would ever reach to probably not even $2 million, including the money that my dad spent on me growing up. It won't even get to $2 million. Will it? I don't know. But no, it won't even get there. Let alone 25 and $35 million spent on orphanages. Now, what happens to their deeds? Well, they will be rewarded for it in dunya. What does that mean? So, for example, that celebrity donated this much money. they will get the praise for it in dunya, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will get them the reward for dunya, because this is the justice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them. In where you seek dunya for it, you will get the dunya for it. But those that seek akhirah, that's not only a kafir, but that's also a Muslim. If you donated $25 million and you were seeking praise from people, you will get that in dunya, but you won't get the reward for it from in the akhirah. And of course, just like the ayah, من كان يريد حرث الآخرة نزد له في حرثه. Whoever wants and wanted to harvest, um, and of course, uh, build for the akhirah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase, نزد له في حرثه, will increase their harvest on judgment day. ومن كان يريد حرث الدنيا نؤتيه منها. And if you wanted the 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 harvest in dunya, and if you the reason why you invested was for dunya, you will get the investment in dunya. In other words, you will get the reward in dunya, but not in the akhirah. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, for those that didn't do it for the sake of the Lord Almighty, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَمِلُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. That the Lord Almighty, when he had come across what actions they had done earlier, what happened? فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. It becomes haba'an. It becomes like a dust, like dust that just gets roaming around, and it becomes as if it's nothing. It eventually just goes away. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَعْمَالُهُمْ كَسَرَابٍ بِقِيعَةٍ يَحْسَبُهُ الظَّمْآنُ مَاءً. That their actions would be just like the mirage, in where the person that is thirsty, they would think of it as if it is water, when in reality it is nothing but an illusion. It will be nothing of reality. And when we're speaking about هل يجزون إلا ما كانوا يعملون, in the end, is that the actions that they had committed is really what they'll be rewarded or punished for. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ هَلْ نُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِالْأَخْسَرِينَ أَعْمَالًا الَّذِينَ ضَلَّ سَعْيُهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يُحْسِنُونَ صُنْعًا. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, should we not tell you of those that will be the uh, بالأخسرين أعمالا, meaning their actions are the highest level in loss. الَّذِينَ ضَلَّ سَعْيُهُمْ, those that had deluded themselves in trying to achieve in this dunya. وهم يحسبون أنهم يحسنون صنعا. And they would actually think they would live in this mental, let's call it comfort, that they're actually doing the right thing. But the reality is otherwise. وَاتَّخَذَ قَوْمُ مُوسَى مِنْ بَعْدِهِ مِنْ حُلِيِّهِمْ. Now this is important, because this ayah is continuing to tell us, what does it look like when somebody might actually think they're doing the right thing, and then they end up losing all the different good actions, and it becomes as if it was not even there. So the ayah continues, وَاتَّخَذَ قَوْمُ مُوسَى مِنْ بَعْدِهِ مِنْ حُلِيِّهِمْ عِجْلًا جَسَدًا لَهُ خُوَارٌ. So what happened? Ittakhadha means they had taken. But here this is not taken just to take, but they actually took a deity, who the people of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. When, after Musa alayhi salam had left them, a man who is known as a Samiri. Samiri is today is Samira is Nablus, today the city of Nablus in northern part of Palestine. Min huliyihim, they had taken from their min huliyihim, from the they they had gathered some jewelry from the people of the Pharaoh. The people of the Pharaoh, they were living around them. Remember, the Bani Israel were the minority. So when they had some kind of an event, they had some kind of a partying or an event, basically. They they borrowed from the jewelry of the people that were considered the upper class, which are the people of the Pharaoh. They borrowed jewelry from them. They took it along with them and they went off with Prophet Musa alayhi salam. They had kept it in secret. And it isn't until Isamiri meets them, and what they did was is that they said, "Well, we can't use this jewelry because it doesn't belong to us." So what did they do? They basically melted it. All right, heated it up, and that jewelry got melted. And then from the melted jewelry, probably gold and who knows what other what other minerals it is, and then melted it. And from that melted jewelry, they later designed a sculpture that looks like a calf. It's like a cow. So why did they want a cow? Why that? Because they had, when they were fleeing away from the Pharaoh, they had come across these tribes that were worshiping idols. In other words, they were worshiping idols which they had pictured and in a form of different animals. And this is actually known in different nations, in different countries, to take animals as containing the spirit of God. So they wanted, according to them, they wanted something that resembled God or to remind them of God. So they made from this melted jewelry, they made a sculpture of a calf, and that calf had a jasad. It was a jasad, meaning that it was a calf, a sculpture of a calf. It was clear right in front of them. Lahu khuwar. Lahu khuwar, lahu khuwar, meaning that it would make sounds. How does it make a sound? So it would have a whistling sound. When wind blows in it, it would start making a whistling sound. And that to them was inspiring, that this calf, this sculpture, is not only making sounds, but it is relating to them. So they considered that that sound that it was making was inspiring, and where it related to them, it spoke to them. And the ayah says, "Alam yaraw annahu la yukallimuhum wa la yahdihim sabila." Don't they realize that they can't even talk to them? They're just looking at that sound, and that it doesn't even speak to them. In other words, if it cannot speak, for sure it is unaware of the realities around it. For sure, this is a dead and nothing but an object, a sculpture that's an object, and it cannot even give them any type of an inspiration, any type of ilm, any type of knowledge, any type of a connection, a relationship. There's no relationship. It's just a whistling sound that it actually ejects. وَلَا يَهْدِيهِمْ سَبِيلًا, and it can't even guide them to the path. And this is really important, because when we're talking about لا يكلمهم, because the Lord Almighty had sent with the prophets and the messengers, had sent with them messages. And of course, وَلَا يَهْدِهِمْ سَبِيلًا, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent with the prophets and the messengers, had sent guidance. In other words, it's not a silent aqidah in where, yes, you believe that there's a God and that's basically the end of the story. But there's actually a connection between how do I live my life based on understanding and knowing that there is the God Almighty. What does that particular God, what does God Almighty want of me after believing in the Lord Almighty? So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, well, this deity is not only not capable of creating itself, because they were the ones that had basically designed it. It can't even give them guidance, and it can't even give them the details or even guide them in any way, because that's just a silent object. اتخذوه وكانوا ظالمين. اتخذوه, and the word I don't want to say missing, because in Arabic it's not a missing word, but it's actually the word, it's like a mustaterun, where the context of it is actually explaining it to us. اتخذوه, for what? اتخذوه means that they had taken it, and the word that we would get out of the context means that they had taken it as a deity. وَكَانُوا ظَالِمِينَ, and they were oppressors. Why were they oppressors? Because the second that you go off the guidance that the Lord Almighty had laid out for you, that would mean you had transgressed the limit. So any transgression for any limit, any transgression for any regulation, any transgression for any fact that is created around you, any reality that's created around you, that would mean it's a type of transgression, it's a type of oppression, it's a type where you yourself are committing what is against the reality, what is against the fact of the fact that surrounds you. ولما سقط في أيديهم ورأوا أنهم قد ضلوا ولما سقط. So what happened is that سقط في أيديهم doesn't mean that it had fallen in their hands. This is actually an idiom. All right, this is really important. سقط في أيديهم, it's an idiom, but an idiom here in where in the literal word says when it dropped between their hands, but this is an idiom. It's not dropped by their between their hands. It's actually that when they had come to the recognition in their hearts that this cannot be God, that is وَرَأَوْا أَنَّهُمْ قَدْ ضَلُّوا, and then they realized that they were actually deluded, that they had been in that illusion, and in that illusion, which is thinking that this sculpture making that sound is really God residing in that sculpture. That was the illusion that made them go into a delusion to worshiping that particular sculpture instead of the Lord Almighty. That's when قالوا لئن لم يرحمنا. That's when they, after they had come to that realization, that illusion and the delusion that they were in, that's when they said, if the Lord Almighty does not shed his mercy on us and does not forgive us, then لَنَكُونَنَّ. The word لَنَكُونَنَّ is basically reflecting here that for sure we will be amongst the losers. You had a question.
So did all of them so did all the people with Prophet Musa become kafir?
So no, not all of them had become kafir, because we're going to see in other ayat. That's a pretty good question. We're going to see in other ayat how the Lord Almighty speaks of three different groups. We're going to come across it down the road. Some of them did actually did actually stand up and say this is wrong, and then the other group did actually um did actually recognize that this was wrong, but they didn't say anything about it. They just were silent. And the third group, they went and just, if that's what everybody is doing, if you can't beat them, join them. And they practice that idolatry with them again. So when we're looking at these three nations, we're looking at three different groups in where these each one took a stance, and the stands the Lord Almighty dealt with each and every single one. The stands in where for those that just said, well, we're, they did this, but we're not going to do it, and we're not going to order them to stop. The Lord Almighty punished them along with the people that actually practiced the idolatry and did the wrong thing. And the only group that was saved were the group that said, this is wrong, you should not be doing this. And when the second group that said, we don't agree with what they're doing, but they're doing it still, when they were coming forward to the first group and they said, you're just wasting your time. Why are you telling them not to do it? And their response was, معذرة إلى ربكم ولعلهم يتقون. It's just so that we would have an excuse in the eyes of the Lord Almighty that we tried to get them back them off from the wrong action, from the wrong doing. And maybe they'll get guided, but we're just telling them not to do the wrong thing so that we would have an excuse in the eyes of the Lord Almighty. And the Lord Almighty only saved them from uh, from um, from the punishment. ولما رجع موسى إلى قومه غضبان أسفا. So Prophet Musa alayhi salam, of course, when he comes back, he was really angry. غضبان. He was really angry at Bani Israel. Why? Because they started worshiping that idol, that calf idol that they had made. قال بئس. So why was he angry? How did he know? Well, the Lord Almighty already had told him that his nation, that the people had turned away from worshiping the Lord Almighty into worshiping that calf. So Prophet Musa alayhi salam, قال بئس ما خلفتموني من بعدي. It's like what a horrible thing that you would do after I would just leave off and take off. أعجلتم أمر ربكم. Are you here rushing أمر ربكم, the matter of your Lord? So what rushing what? So أعجلتم أمر ربكم, meaning are you here rushing that the Lord Almighty would curse you? Or are you here rushing that the Lord Almighty would punish you? Or are you here rushing what the Lord Almighty had promised, that I would come with more information, that I would come with the certain messages, and you wanted the message to come so fast that, oh, because the message didn't come fast enough, we're going to turn away from the Lord? So this is ajiltum amra rabbikum. This is exactly like when yep. This is exactly when we're talking about when we're talking about deviation, in where certain people would say, "Well, if the Lord Almighty would have wanted me to be guided, He would have guided me." And then, so what do you do, or what do these people do? Well, then they would actually do more and more wrong, because they're concerned about the Lord Almighty wanting to send them guidance. Well, it's like if you really were keen about getting guidance, you would have started the path of guidance. وألقى الألواح وأخذ برأس أخيه يجره إليه. I want you to look at the word يجره, because the word يجره, this is مد صلة كبرى. So let's see. وألقى الألواح. He comes across and sees how they were worshiping the idols. What does he do? The tablets, he throws them out of anger, not realizing what he had done. وأخذ برأس أخيه. Goes to his brother Harun. And now here, برأس أخيه, it's not that he, cuts his brother's head off and starts, pulling it. No, that's an idiom. أخذ برأس أخيه يجره إليه. It's an idiom. It's an, sometimes when just like when in our culture, if somebody does good, you say pat on the back. So pat on the back, it doesn't mean you're slapping them on the back, but it's a way of recognizing good job, or it's more of a body language. And here, أخذ برأس أخيه يجره إليه, it was more of a body language, in where he put his hand on his beard or on his head, and just pulled him towards him. يجره إليه, in where he was pulling him towards him. And that's more of an expression. What did you just do? Like, why did you allow this to happen? قال ابن إن القوم استضعفوني وكادوا يقتلونني. Said, the son of my mother. But of course, son of my mother here, it's more of seeking affection, although but they were both his biological mother and father, that he had the same father and mother. But here he was like, it's like, we have the same mom. Why would I, well, why would you think that I would, be an ally to them against you? Why would you think that I would support them in what they are doing and leave my own brother that is from the same mom and actually support them? That's pretty much, kind of like what he was saying. In al qawm istadafuni, he said, in al qawm istadafuni, they were looking, they were seeing me as if I'm weak. وَكَادُوا يَقْتُلُونَنِي, and they were about to kill me. But don't do this is the first time I'm going to say this word, because I just learned it today. Shade and fraud. Yeah, there you go. Don't practice shade and fraud on me. In other words, don't let, for those that are the enemies of what, our enemies, don't let them have that joy and the pleasure of our misfortune, in where they would see that we're losing them right now. In other words, don't let them see the joy in how we might actually go into this disagreement in front of them. ولا تجعلني مع القوم الظالمين. And here, don't let me, and don't, it's not don't let me, but let me correct that one. ولا تجعلني مع القوم الظالمين. In other words, don't include me part of the oppressors. So in other words, here Prophet Musa alayhi salam, you could see that he didn't really give a chance for Prophet Harun alayhi salam to explain that he was not allowing this to happen, but he was weak to intervene and actually stop them from doing this. قال رب اغفر لي. Now Prophet Musa alayhi salam, after hearing the statements of Prophet Harun, he says, رب اغفر لي. قال رب اغفر لي. He said, "O Lord Almighty, forgive me and for my brother." So after hearing the words of Prophet Harun alayhi salam, he recognizes that he's not at fault. وَأَدْخِلْنَا فِي رَحْمَتِكَ. And أدخلنا, this is a beautiful statement right here. أدخلنا في رحمتك. In other words, it's like the mercy. It's the mercy of the Lord Almighty. It's like it's a it's a shade, or it's a, I don't know. It's like a something that fills, and then adkhilna fi rahmatik, it's like embrace us with your mercy, and you are wa anta arhamur rahimin, and you are the most merciful. You are the most merciful. I'm gonna end right here. Inshallah, next week we'll continue, because this is a beautiful thing to end on. Wa anta arhamur rahimin. أدخلنا في رحمتك وأنت أرحم الراحمين. Ya Allah, embrace us with your mercy, and you are the most merciful. I'd be happy to um, answer any questions or any corrections. And here I'm allowing you to unmute yourselves, or even um, or say, or even draw on the screen, if if you will. And jazakumullah khair. Oh, I like that the sister wrote Super Fatima. There you go. It feels good to write your name. And Hamza, mashallah, not missing a single class, mashallah. So if there's anybody that would like to add anything, ask a question, and inshallah we'll answer those. Inshallah, Dr. Hinna is here, and mashallah, everyone's here. All right. So I'd give a couple of seconds, and whoever wants to unmute themselves, you can unmute yourself, or even the people on Facebook, you could also comment or ask any questions as well. So next week, inshallah, we'll be doing from Inna الذين اتخذوا العجل سينالهم غضب من ربهم. We'll be continuing with that. Um, I was really hoping that I could do more today, but I guess time is running up, and every single time we come across, hoping that we could finish, we end up not finishing everything, alhamdulillah. All right, everyone, jazakumullah khairan, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.